Good morning, afternoon, or evening, folks, and welcome to Cast of All Trades, the show where we talk about developing skills, exploring ideas, and following curiosity. I'm your host, Orion Siebert. In this episode, I share 14 steps to write and publish your first nonfiction book. This is a process I pieced together over the years, and I found it to be particularly effective for me. Note that this isn't some magical shortcut to get you from nothing to a published book with 1,000 reviews on it in the span of a week. That's not the case. It's just an organized, step-by-step path that you can use to track your progress and generally know what it is you're going to work on next. And if you want more skill guides like this one, then make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on more stuff like this in the future. I think that about covers it. So without further ado, here is my 14-step process to writing and publishing your first nonfiction book. Before we dive into this 14-step process I put together, I think it's important to cover who am I to talk about writing and publishing a book. This is my background generally in writing and publishing. I wrote my first book, Mentors Make Men, back in, I want to say it was August of 2022 is when I started, and it took me about 6 months to write and publish it. I ended up publishing it right about same time in February. Did that over the span of about 6 months, and since then, before I ended up scrapping that first publishing company, and sadly the book along with it, it had over 175 reviews on Amazon with an average rating of 4.5 to 4.8 stars. My memory's a little bit hazy on that, and I can't really find the information anywhere anymore, so it's a little disappointing, but I still have a couple physical copies lying around here and there, and I have some screenshots here and there of progress I made over time. I'm pretty sure I stopped doing screenshots after 100 reviews or something, but anyways, it ended up hitting around 175 reviews with about 4.5 to 4.8 stars, somewhere in that range. Since then, I've been working on writing more books. I have 2 books that are finished, which I haven't published yet, but I'm currently in the process of doing that, setting up a new publishing company, getting all of that ready. I'm also currently writing my 4th book. So I'm going through this process, I've used this process, and while I may not have been wildly successful with my first book, and while my other 2 books that I currently have ready are not out yet, it sold, like the one book that I did put out, sold more copies than most self-published books ever will. Most self-published books never sell more than 10, 20 copies. I end up selling a couple hundred. So it's a little bit better than what most people will probably do. So based on my experience, this is roughly the step-by-step process I use to write and publish nonfiction titles. Note that some of these steps you can do and should do simultaneously, and I'll touch on some of that as we go. And also, I'm talking to nonfiction authors. You could take this process and probably use it for fiction titles. I just haven't done that. I'm only going to speak to nonfiction because it's what I've written and what I've worked on the most. Also, I will not be talking about accounting, taxes, any of the business side of actually doing publishing, writing, being an author, the actual authoring of the business. So, getting started, I think it's personally more important to focus on actually creating books so you can for now, track your expenses in a spreadsheet, have them on hand, write dates, write out what you bought, what you spent the money on, how much you spent, just keep that, put it aside for a while. Don't worry about that nearly as much. Just keep track of it. And once you're actually making sales, then you can worry about tax stuff. And it's not as complicated as most people make it out to be. And most of the companies, most of the distribution platforms we'll be using will make doing taxes much easier than you might think. I think that about covers my big preface. Let's start with the beginning, where all books need to start, choosing a topic. Step 1, choose your topic. You want to choose a topic that's interesting to you. Many people who go into this publishing world, a lot of them want to get into the world of self-publishing because they hear you can make tons of money on writing and publishing a bunch of books, and they go into it thinking, yeah, I'm going to write a bunch of books about hydroponics or about like dog walking or dog care or other random topics that they honestly just don't care about, which yes, you can do that and you can make money doing that if you want to go into this business and you do commit to creating high quality books, but it really does help if you are interested in it. You don't have to be an expert, but if you are, that does make writing it much easier. That said, if you aren't an expert, you can also be just choosing a topic that you're interested in and you want to learn more about. That's what I did with my first book, Mentors Make Men. I am not a psychologist, but That book is entirely built around evolutionary psychology and men's development and men's psychology. So I did a bunch of research. Most of the time that I spent for that book was spent either in research or in editing. I'll dive into that in a second. But I was willing to become an expert in those topics because it interested me. Would I consider myself an absolute expert on everything evolutionary psychology and men's development? No, absolutely not. But I got good enough where I could create a book to teach people who are a couple steps behind me. So you don't have to be an expert. If you are one, great, that helps out. But generally, so long as you're willing to put in the work to create a high quality product, to find good information, to take that and condense it and rewrite it in such a way that it will be compelling for people to read it, that will be good enough. Second, as you're also looking at choosing your topic, you might want to also look at something that actually has a market. If you want to make money on the book, that is, define a specific market, look at the kinds of books that are similar to what you were doing. So for me, what I was doing with Mentors Make Men, I knew that there was a market for men's development, personal development books. There were a couple of books that I looked at to see what is my direct competition, what books am I going to be very similar to. And I was able to go in, I was able to find those genres, find those books, and see what do these books look like? What do they write about? What are the authors like? How many reviews are they getting? Can I estimate how many sales they're getting? It was good for me to figure out, is this actually going to be a profitable, is there going to be a chance for this to be a good selling book? Because if you're writing a book that doesn't have a market for it, you're probably not going to sell very many copies, which for some people, that's just fine. Some people just want to write the book and want to put it out there so they can say, I wrote a book, which great, good on them. But there are also a lot of people who want to write a book and they want to make money off of that book. So when you're looking at what kind of books you want to write, it's important to look at something that interests you, something you're willing to become an expert in, and something that actually has a market. So for that last one, define your specific market. And this should not be a book for everyone, because a book for everyone is a book for no one. My market was leaning towards more young conservative men who are pretty lonely and want to better themselves. Maybe they didn't have many friends and are looking to change up their lives. That was my general target market. And I knew that going into it. I was able to find books that were similar to that, see what do these books do, how could they be better, what could I add on to this topic, and that's what I ended up doing. I was able to sell many books because of that. So choose your topic, something that interests you, something you're willing to become an expert in or research a lot of, and something that actually has a market. Step 2, research. I already touched on this a little bit, but there's a number of things you're going to want to do in your research. You're going to want to look for keywords, look for things that people are going to be searching if they want to find your book. You want to step into the shoes of your specific target market. Find your target listener, your target reader, whatever kind of book you're doing, audio, paperback, physical, whatever, and figure out what is this person going to be searching if they want to find my book or if they want to find something like my book. Because Amazon is a very big search engine. It's a very big internal search engine. A lot of people, this isn't me, when I go to Amazon, I almost always know what I'm getting, and I very rarely will hop on Amazon to say, I want to find something like this thing. I almost always go on with a specific product in mind. But a lot of people don't shop like that, especially if they're looking for books. They go on Amazon and they type in a couple keywords to see, I want something kind of like this, or this is the problem I'm having. This is something I'm looking at, I'm wanting to learn about, all these different things. You want to get into the mind of your target customer. You want to think, what is this person going to be researching? What are their specific keywords that they're going to be searching for? This is also where knowing what other similar books have that you can take advantage of. For me, I was able to look at a bunch of books that were similar to mine to see what are the common keywords that they use that I might want to take advantage of. How to is a very powerful keyword. Note that keywords does not just mean like an individual, like the word men. That is a short tail keyword and it's going to be very broad and a lot of people might be searching that. You're probably not going to show up for that if you have a book all about men's psychology. You might want to do a longer tail keyword, such as how men make friends. It's a bit longer, it's a bit more specific, it's a bit more drilled down. And if someone is searching for that on Amazon and your book is all about how men make friends, that your book has a higher likelihood of showing up for that position. So keywords is the core of your research in general as you're looking for metadata. This is going to be very important later as you're actually crafting your metadata. What else are you going to be looking for in your research? You're going to want to look at book titles. You're going to want to go into those books and see what are the chapters that they have. What are the topics that these books cover? Because if you look across a bunch of different books, you're not going to be plagiarizing anything, and two, you're going to be finding gaps in their information. Not every book is going to have every piece of information, and it's going to be helpful for you to see what books, what are the common themes among all these books that might be good for you to include, and what are some of the things lacking in some of these books that you might want to include as well. Looking at these chapters and topics is very important, but also going down to the review section of many of these books. I would often ignore the 1-star reviews and the 5-star reviews because the 1-star reviews are often just hateful, bashing, and often aren't very helpful. Same with the 5-star reviews, but in reverse. They're super glowing. They don't really tell you a lot. They just say, yes, I loved this book. It was so perfect. I wish there were more books like this. I wish every book was like this. Not very helpful to you writing a new book. I would suggest looking at the 2 to 4-star reviews. Look for people who have actual constructive criticism for the book, where they might say, this was good, but this could have been better, or I wish that they had this included in the book. Take note of all those things and start making your spreadsheet. Start making your organized list of data, whatever you want to have to place all of your keywords, your titles, your chapters, all this stuff that you looked into that seems interesting to you. Put it all in one big place so you can look at it later and you can organize it later and work on that. But reviews can be a especially powerful tool to see what our audience is craving, what do they love, what do they want more of. Finally, as I said at the beginning of this, all this information will be very helpful to you later as you're working on crafting your book's metadata. And your book's metadata is going to be very important if you want to actually create a book that sells. A book with crappy metadata will never get in front of its target audience. A book with crappy metadata will just sink to the bottom and will never be seen again. It happens so often because very rarely are authors also business people. Very rarely are authors also marketers. And if you want to succeed in the business of writing and publishing, you have to get into the mindset of treating this as a business, not just as an art form. That said, if you do want to treat this as just an art form and just create books, feel free to just totally skip this section. You don't have to do research if you don't want to. If you have a specific title in mind, if you have a specific thing in mind, if you already know exactly this is the book I want to write, great, go and write that book. But don't be surprised if it doesn't sell much of anything, because the book you want to write isn't always the book that other people want to read. Keep that in mind. Have I written most of the books I've written are books that I both want to write, and I think a bunch of people want to read. Maybe not a crap ton of people, maybe not tens of thousands of people, but there were some people that want to read it. So I knew that going into it, that I wouldn't have the largest audiences, but the research that I did to get keywords, to get titles, get chapters, topics, and reviews, to collect all this stuff, helped me to reach out to those niche audiences to help me get some people to buy my book and to read it. Moving on to step 3, making the outline. You can put a lot of prep work in up front, and it helps me out so much when going into actually writing the book. Here's some of the steps I like to include in writing the outline. 1, it's very helpful to just have a work in progress title. It doesn't have to stick around forever, but just having something to refer to your book as, some project name, something like that. You can say, this is the book I'm working on, so it doesn't just sit in your head as my book. If you give it a name, even if it's just work in progress and you know I'm going to switch this out in the future, just a working title can be so helpful. It can help you reach out and talk to people to say, this is the book I'm working on, this is what it's called for now, and it'll help stick in people's minds. You can get some feedback on it, but actually writing out the outline. Write out all the key major topics you want in your book. These will ultimately become your main chapters. From these chapters, you want to write out 3 to 5 sub-chapters or subtopics that you're going to include in these sections. You don't want to go you don't want to have too many sub-chapters in here, because then you may as well just fracture off into more and more chapters. But generally, this is going to help you break down, this is the main idea, and then under that you have the main supporting ideas you're going to be bringing up throughout the book, throughout those chapters. Next, throughout each of those sections, you can do this for either the major chapters or for the sub-chapters. I like to do it for both, sometimes just depending on what comes up. You want to have 1 to 2 examples / stories of whatever principle or whatever thing you're trying to talk about. Stories are the best way to teach people. We can tell them all the information we want, but if we don't explain it through story or we don't explain it through example, very rarely are people going to actually internalize that information for themselves. For example, as I've been going through this podcast, I've been talking about various examples I've used when writing my first book, Mentors Make Men, because that was my first book. these are the lessons I'm talking about from that book that I used to help you write your first book. By showing and teaching through examples, you're able to better connect with me to say, okay, this is what he did for his first book. Maybe I could do that for my first book, or maybe these are other things that could work well for me. Or you're able to just take this information and apply it to something instead of just, here's information, I don't know how it works, I'm just going to kind of guess at it. So, have your key major topics, 3 to 5 subchapters, 1 to 2 examples and stories. You're going to also want to write out just have a rough idea of your introduction and your conclusion. Just have a little something at the top to say, these are the main things I want to include in my introduction, and at the bottom, these are the main things I want to have in my conclusion. Doesn't have to get all that complicated, just have this rough layout. A lot of people talk about, oh, do you need an outline? Like, do you really need an outline? Some people prefer to write without an outline, or they call themselves pantsers or whatever. They still have some sort of outline in their head. They have some main bullet beats or whatever. They have a goal they want to get to. They have stuff they want to do. No matter what, everyone has an outline of some sort. For me, I like using a major outline. I like to plan out a bunch of stuff because then I know whenever I sit down to write, I know exactly what I'm going to be talking about for that writing session. It's so much easier for me to just have everything structured out and planned out of this is the chapter I'm working on. These are the main bullet points I want to expound upon. It doesn't have to get more complicated than that. I probably spend most of my time, like a good, maybe not most of my time, but I spend a good portion of my time creating a book on the outlining because I can generally process information quite quickly. So if I have a good outline written out, I don't have to think about what comes next as I'm writing out the main draft. Speaking of writing out the main draft, moving on to step 4, write your first draft. There are 3 ways that I like to do this. I've done this in 3 different ways, and I've experienced all 3 of these ways. There's pros and cons to each. I'm going to go into each of them a little bit. One is the obvious. Write it yourself. Sit down every day for a good chunk of time to write out your book. Just go from beginning to end, work on a chapter, skip around, work on a different chapter. Sometimes I'll work on the introduction. Sometimes I'll work on chapter 4. Sometimes I'll work on the conclusion. Sometimes I'll start with chapter 3, then I'll go up to chapter 1 and just keep on bouncing around a little bit here and there, wherever I feel inspired to work on that day. That works for me, doesn't work for everyone. For writing, it really is just practice. Not everyone's going to be a good writer right off the bat. I'm certainly not a good writer right off the bat. I wasn't. And I still fall short in many ways in my writing. But I've learned over time how I can generally write better. Some people work well in just going for it, practicing, seeing how can I improve this sentence. For me, I try to write more like how I speak, and it's worked out pretty well for me. Some people like to actually dictate their books, so they'll bring an audio recorder with them as they go out for a walk, and they'll just dictate their book through that. They'll take that and they'll plug it into their audio recorder into their computer. They'll do some dictation software. Then later on, they'll go through the editing process and just clean it up. The whole point of this first draft is just get your ideas all out of your head and onto the platform, all onto the page, because it's much easier to create a well-crafted, better book to just put something out there, something that you can work on, something you can edit, something you can change up. Amazing books aren't written in one shot. Amazing books are written and then they're edited over and over and over and over again. But we're not talking about editing quite yet. We're still in the first draft. So step 1 is you could write it yourself. Another option is to do an AI-supported method where you write out most of it yourself or you write out sections of it yourself, then with the right prompts, you can get AI to help you write out other sections. A lot of people think, oh, that's controversial. You're not a writer if you use AI. It's a tool. Like we use all sorts of tools to help us write. If you use autocorrect or if you use grammar, like a grammar checker or a spell checker as you're writing, congratulations, you're using a tool. You're using a computer. Get over yourself. And as I said, most of the book is actually crafted in the editing section. This is just to get a first draft out. When I use AI to help me write books, I'll typically write out a good section. I'll take my organized outline of my ideas. I'll give it to my tool and I'll say, this is what I want. Here is a large sample of my writing so you have a good idea of how I like to write. And then I want you to try writing out this section based on the outline I've given you. And overall, it's worked out pretty well for me. I personally use Perplexity AI to help me write out various sections of books, and it's worked out pretty well. That said, other people aren't going to have that same experience. Using AI is certainly a skill all on its own that you have to learn. I've been playing with it for a while, so I feel confident in doing it. And I'm pretty confident in my capabilities to go back through and make sure nothing's plagiarized from anywhere. So it's a good way for me to just get a first draft out there. It's something I've done with one of my recent books that I'm very satisfied with and helped me cut down on the writing and editing process so much. Working on Mentors Make Men took me about 6 months. Working on the book that I used AI to help me write, it was shorter by a decent margin. I was able to write most of the book in the span of maybe 2 or 3 days because I just had the time to do it, and I was able to use AI to leverage that to help me write out information so much faster. Finally, the last option for getting your first draft out there is to work with a ghostwriting service. Again, other people will say, oh, you're just using other people to write your book for you, which technically true. But if you want to have your name on the book and you're not confident in your own personal writing abilities, ghostwriters can be a godsend for them. And I know some people who they have some amazing ideas, but they're just really bad at articulating them. They're very bad at putting them on paper or being able to explain them in such a way that it can go into a book very well. But they're great at research, they're great at putting together ideas, they're great at doing all that stuff. They're just not good at the final step of actually putting it on paper to make the first draft. For them, ghostwriters are great. They're so helpful, and I've seen so many great books come out through ghostwriting. That's what I ended up doing for Mentors Make Men, for the most part. For the first draft, I went through a ghostwriting service. I gave them my outline, which at the time was longer than the book ended up being, and they were able to help me condense that down into the first draft of the book. And while it wasn't amazing, it was a start. It was a place for me to say, this is what I have to start with. This is generally the right topics in the right places. Now I just have to clean it up. And by the time I published that book, 90 to 95% of the text written in that book was handwritten by me. So even when I was going through a ghostwriting service, through the whole editing process of changing things up time and time and time again, it was 95 to 99% my writing by the end of it. So even if you're using a ghostwriting service, you'll still end up writing a good amount of the book. So that's step 4, writing your first draft. Next, this is one that you can start just about anywhere, but I put it here for the sake of I couldn't find a better place to fit it in, and that's building a lead magnet. If you're trying to build a author business, or if you're trying to treat this like a business and actually make money from your books, you're going to want to make a lead magnet. You're going to want to build an email list. The best way to do that is through a good lead magnet. I'm not going to go too in-depth on this because it's going to vary from book to book to book. But you're going to want to create something of actual value that you can give to people in exchange for their emails. You're going to put this thing in your book. You're going to put this thing somewhere in your book. Usually it's going to be the front or somewhere the first couple pages, a QR code, a link, something like that you can have your readers click on, or QR code scan to get to a website that they can input their email, and in return, they might get a checklist. They might get a standalone workbook that goes along with your main book. That's what I did with Mentors Make Men. I wrote a workbook that went along with the actual main book, so that at the end of each chapter, you could go to the workbook, and you would have exercises to do, you would have activities to do, you would have things that you could go out and do to apply the things from the main book. And while I didn't get many emails from it, it still ended up being a good project for me. So work on your lead magnet sort of on the side. It doesn't have to be too important right now, but as you're working on your first draft, you should have a good idea of what is some good companion content that can go along with this main book. Again, this is entirely optional. If you just want to write your one book, go for it. For some books, that's exactly what you want to do. For some of the books I'm working on now, I'm not going to make a lead magnet for it. It's just going to be a standalone. You want a book? Here's a book. Here's all the information in it. Here's everything you need. You don't need anything else with it. You don't need to go to any other sites. You don't need to download anything else. You don't need any bonus PDFs or whatever. It's just the book. So lead magnet, well, optional. If you're looking to do this for the long term, can be very helpful in building your own author brand. Moving on to step 6, we finally have editing. This is where you take your first draft and you turn it into your second draft, and your third draft, and your fourth draft. And you go time and time and time again, where you go through it and you clean it up. You make it prettier and prettier and prettier. A lot of polishing, a lot of scrapping, a lot of deleting, a lot of pulling your hair out. But It's through that trial, the fire and the flames, they're able to turn and temper your crappy manuscript into something golden, into something beautiful that works out well. There's a couple different types of editing that you're going to want to look at. There's content editing. This is the main one that I personally think you should start with. It's looking at how good is the actual content of the book. Are you giving information that is actually valuable, or is this just fluff stacked on useless crap? Or is this fluff stacked on useful crap that people are just not seeing the useful stuff because it's covered in so much fluff? And also, what order are you presenting the information in? Is it a logical order to do so? There's a reason why lists typically don't start with, here's the last thing you want to do, and then halfway through they'll say, oh, here's the first thing you want to do, and at the very end they'll say, here's the stuff you want to do in the middle. No, there's a reason that lists go in order. Sometimes it seems dumb or it seems obvious of, yes, Orion, we know, things need to go in the right order. You'd be surprised how many times I've seen writers or how many times I've seen people working on books, they don't think about that. They just put everything down in the order they came up in their mind, and if they have a good idea later, they just shove it in later, instead of going back through and seeing, actually, chapter 2 would be better at chapter 5, and chapter 7 would be better at chapter 1. Go through and see, where should this content all go? What's a logical, a good, smart order for it? Next, after content editing, I like to do copy editing, where this is going through and doing grammar, syntax, all that stuff. Everything that actually fixes the ugliness of certain things. It's boring, it's dull, not going to go too much into it. Finally, in editing, this is where I put it, but it would probably fit well in formatting, which is going to be the next step anyways, so just going to blend it in here. In the last bit is going to be adding your quote-unquote bonus pages. This is going to be your lead magnet, QR code, and link page. This is going to be a page tactfully ask for reviews for your book, typically done at the middle or at the end of your book, because sometimes people usually won't leave reviews on books, but if you ask for it and you make it easy for them by giving them a link or a QR code to scan that instantly takes them to the Amazon page or instantly takes them to another web page that will give them the opportunity to leave a good review for your book, people are going to be more willing to do that. You might want to have a page that hints to your next book. I'm going to talk about that at the very end. And you're going to might want to have a copyright page to talk about, hey, this is legal stuff. This book is copyrighted. Don't steal. All that crap. So, step 6, editing. Moving on to step 7, formatting. We're halfway there. Formatting is all the pretty stuff. There's a number of ways you can do this, but generally, this is what you're going to want to look at. I like to think of formatting as your quote-unquote structural editing. This is where you make everything look pretty. You're going to want to look at your headings. You're going to want to look at your subheadings, look at your body text, look at your page numbers, your page dimensions, your table of contents. You might want to look at the ebook layout versus the print layout. For example, the ebook layout typically has margins where the actual content of the book is centered on the page, whereas in a print layout, you'll typically have offset margins, where you'll have one margin is thicker than the other, and they'll flip-flop back and forth, because books have centerfolds, so you don't want to have text going deep down into that centerfold, so it's hard to read. Those are small things you want to keep in mind as you're going through and doing all the structural formatting and editing of your book to make it look pretty and readable and all that good and fun stuff. This is also where you go through and make sure that you're happy with your text and your font. Having a good font that's easy to read can be so helpful. And a good rule of thumb is for your print text, people like to have serif font, or a font that has the little wings on the ends, or the fancy font is the good way to put it. Then for your ebooks or your digital stuff, people like to have sans serif font because it's less pixels on the screen, it's easier, it's simpler, it's cleaner. Those are just some basic rules of thumb, and there are plenty of other things that you could do for creating and formatting your books. You could have big drop caps at the beginning of each paragraph of the chapter. You could have fancy graphics and all that stuff all throughout there. Generally, I advise keep it simple, but if you want to add that, this is probably the time to do it. This is the last you're going to be touching your manuscript. Once this is done, consider your manuscript done. Next, moving on to section 8, where we're doing all the metadata, a mix of SEO and good copywriting, all of this stuff. We're getting all this taken care of so we can move on to our next big steps. Metadata. This is going to include finalizing your title of the book, the subtitle, the main keywords you're going to be targeting, the categories and genre, the back cover description, the online page/product description, and so much more. This is going to be focusing on how can I get my book in front of my target audience if they're just searching for keywords. If they're just searching for things online, what are they going to be searching and how are they going to be searching for it? This is where you go back to the very beginning where we were talking about research and you start applying that. By now, as you've been writing your book, there's a good chance you've thought up a couple titles. Before you go with any of those titles directly, just think for a moment. Would you click on this book, or would the average person click on this book, the average target market person, the person you want to read this book, would they click on this book if they just saw the title? Would they say, yes, that's going to solve my problem? Would they click on your book? If not, change your title. Your subtitle is there to help boost up your title. It's there to help you provide more context. It's there to give you more room for more keywords. See what are people going to be searching that could be supported by this. If you want to have a bit of a flashier title that is a bit more fun to say, for me it was Mentors Make Men, because the whole play on it is that it's supposed to be men make men, but the idea of it is that men also encompasses mentors, and that there's something about mentorship that creates masculine figures. It's a bit of a play on things. Most people probably didn't catch that, but that's fine. I provided much more context in the subtitle, which I don't remember right now, but it's something like how father figures, friends, and mentors develop boys into men, something like that, where it provides so much more context from more than just the title would provide. So the subtitle is there to not only give you more space for keywords, but to give you much more context give readers or potential readers more context on what the book's going to provide. Next, I'm going to actually be talking about some of those keywords. There's a couple simple practices you're going to want to keep in mind, especially when applying keywords to your title and subtitle. Do not keyword stuff. Do not just shove a bunch of crap into your title and subtitle so it's painfully obvious that you're just stuffing a bunch of keywords in there in hopes that someone types a certain set of words in the search bar and your book's going to pop up because you happen to have a couple very random words in your subtitle and title that don't actually make much sense to be there. You want to have a good mix of good basic SEO practices of high quality keywords that people are actually going to be searching for, that make sense, that lead people down a good line, but also a good sense of basic copywriting principles, where copywriting is the art of persuasive writing to get people to buy things. You want to have a good mix of this, something that sounds good and draws people in, and something that's searchable in a database. It's a bit hard to do. It's going to take some practice. AI can help with this. There are various other tools that can help you with this, but ultimately it comes down to some sense of trial and error and some practice. So I would advise you to go through and create a bunch of titles, create a bunch of subtitles, get some AI to help you to say, what are some good target keywords based on this manuscript or based on whatever research you've done so far. Get it to help you come up with more titles and subtitles and keywords and see, where does this all land? How do I fit this all together? Next, categories and genre. You should at this point already know what categories and genre generally your book belongs to. But across almost every single publishing distribution platform, they're going to have different genres listed. So we're going to be talking about different distribution platforms next, but just keep in mind, what are the main categories of your book? Some distribution platforms can get very niche in their categories, which can be very good for you, or it can be detrimental to you, because you want to find a good mix of niche enough where you stand out in the crowd, but not too niche where no one's going to find you. So this is all a balancing act to see, where does my book properly fit in? And for the most part, you can actually change a lot of this down the line if something isn't working out well for you. So I wouldn't worry too much about it, but getting it correct right off the bat does help a bit. Next is back cover description. And this is back cover description and online page/product description, all that stuff. This is a continuation of the title and subtitle, where you provide more context to the book. You try to convince people who have already been drawn in by the title and the subtitle. If they need just a little more convincing, that's what the back cover description is for. The online page/product description, that's what all of this is for. Again, you want to write some good SEO content. You want to write something there that could benefit you if someone's searching online for a problem that your book can solve. At the same time, You also want to write something that draws people in, that captivates them, that makes them say, yes, you are like this book is promising a benefit. It's promising a solution to a problem. It's promising something that I personally need, that I, the reader, need, that I want. I want that benefit that it's promising. I want the transformation that this book is promising. So again, it's a good mix of good SEO content and good copywriting content. It takes practice. It takes effort. Again, use AI to help you. I would recommend that. Get some help from professional copywriters if you can, or just find people in the marketing space, or just go online to see, what do other people think of what I'm doing? Can they help me figure out how to make this sound better? So that's step 8, metadata. Next, step 9 is getting all of your publishing accounts in order, your publishing distribution platforms. This is optional. If you're going to be self-publishing, which I personally recommend, because most people are probably not cut out to be in traditional publishing. I have not gone down that route. I've not really looked into that route, but that's just from what I've heard from a lot of people who have done both. It's a bit of a mixed bag. So if you're looking at self-publishing, here are a number of distribution platforms you might want to consider, and here, starting with the main 3, and then I have a couple other options I would recommend looking at. So first and foremost, Amazon KDP. I hate Amazon. I hate working with Amazon KDP, but they are currently the largest book retailer in the US and perhaps in the world. I don't remember if that's the case. So you kind of have to be on Amazon in some way, shape, or form. If you don't want to work directly with Amazon KDP, there are other ways to get on Amazon, but you will get a smaller royalty from it. That said, if you are going to be on Amazon KDP, I would recommend do not select expanded distribution. There's a reason for that, because there are other distribution platforms that will give you better royalties and also will hit more areas. Next, you can do Amazon KDP for paperback, print, and hardcover. Next platform is going to be Draft to Digital, or D2D for short. For this, I highly recommend just using their ebook distribution methods. They have a large number of distribution partners that can work out well with them. They do have a paperback or print version of like a print distribution option that they do through their subsidiary company or partner company, Smashwords, but there are other distribution platforms that work better for that. I would highly recommend just using Draft to Digital for their ebooks and potentially for their audiobooks down the line once they get that all sorted out. Next is Ingram Spark. This is going to be the big giant of the publishing world, the self-publishing world, the distribution world for paperback, especially paperback and hardcover. These are the guys to go to. They have the largest network of distribution options for the books published on there. It's also the main place that libraries will go to buy their books and other bookstores will go to buy their books. So these are the main 3 I would highly recommend. And of course, all of them have very different options and very different requirements for the manuscripts uploaded to them and the covers uploaded to them and all that stuff. So that's going to be a little bit of a pain to get reformatted and set up for each individual place, but trust me, it's generally worth it. Also, as I mentioned, as I was talking about Ingram Spark, this came to mind. Be mindful to not double post your books on different platforms. For example, Ingram Spark distributes to to a large majority of paperback distribution or print distribution places, such as libraries, bookstores, Barnes & Noble, places like that. At the same time, there are a couple other options I would recommend that could also cover the same places. So if you're already distributing through Ingram Spark, you might want to actually not do print distribution through any other platform except for Amazon, because you don't want to have overlap. There are some complications that come up with that, so just generally don't. But if you do want to look at other options for distribution, I'm not going to go too deep into their rates and all that stuff like I did with Amazon KDP, Draft to Digital, and Ingram Spark. If you want other options to look at, then here's what I would recommend. Look at Kobo Writing Life, look at Barnes & Noble Press, look at Apple Books if you're willing to put up with Apple's BS. Look at not Google Play Books, but Google Play Books Partner Center if you're willing to put up with Google's BS. Look at Gumroad, and look at Lulu. These are a number of different distribution platforms. Some of them do print, some of them just do ebook. It'll vary from place to place, but just look at them, do a bit more research on it. Overall, the main 3 I would tell you to look at is Amazon KDP, Draft to Digital, and Ingram Spark. They'll get you the most bang for your buck, and the fewer platforms you have to look at to manage your funds and to manage your royalties and all that stuff, It's just easier. Moving on from your distribution platforms to step number 10, getting your covers done. You have two main options here. You can either do them yourself or you can get someone to do them for you. Most people, I would recommend doing the latter because most authors are not graphic designers. They're not artists. These are not people that should be creating their own book covers. And a book cover will make all the difference in book sales. People say, don't judge a book by its cover, but guess what? Books are judged by their covers. People are not going to read your book if it looks horrible on the outside and they aren't appealed to it, if they aren't drawn to it. So I would highly recommend just find someone online who can create a good book cover. It doesn't have to be amazing. It doesn't have to cost a lot. There are a couple different book cover design places, like 99 Designs. They do a pretty good job for the price. I'm pretty sure there's another one called 100 Covers, maybe. Probably messing that up, but that's another option. You'd also look at Upwork or Fiverr, which they can do pretty well. There's a number of designers on Fiverr that can give some surprisingly good work for very cheap. That said, if you do feel confident in your design skills, well, good luck. I'll just say that. I'm not going to go into a whole crash course on how to make a good-looking cover because it's going to vary from genre to genre to genre. But generally, look at other covers in your genre or other books that are similar to yours and just see what are the main elements that they have in common. Make something that stands out yet looks like it fits in place, that looks like it fits alongside all the other books, that it belongs there. Just, you want something that looks professional, that'll catch the eye, but not catch the eye too much where people say, oh, that's hideous. Moving on to step 11, we're almost there. Getting your ARC copies. Get your advanced reader copies. That's what ARC stands for. You can often do this by getting your manuscript all uploaded and getting your covers uploaded to some platforms. Amazon KDP will typically give you the option of buying copies early that you can distribute to people. Or you can do what I did and just distribute PDF copies to people so they can read it wherever, or EPUB copies if you want them to read them on their Kindles or other e-reader devices, whatever. But the point of ARC copies is that you can ask for people to be early/advanced readers, where they get the book for free. In exchange, they agree to leave a review on launch day. You want to reach out to potentially book influencers. You want to reach out to people in the space of the topic that you're covering. This could be book influencers. This could be just friends and family. This could be people at your local library. This is essentially just a chance for you to get your book out there early on, so that you can start drawing up, so you can start buzzing up some hype for the book. This also gives you a good chance to take promo pictures and work on a book launch video. And speaking of book launch videos, next, step 12 is working on your book launch. This is going to vary for everyone. Everyone does book launches differently. Some people have big launches, some people have very small launches. This is still a process I'm very much working on figuring out how I can do well and effectively. But this is just some ideas of some things you might want to consider for your book launch. You might want to have a launch promo price of, for the first 7 days or the first 30 days or the first 2 weeks or something like that. You have a slightly discounted price where it's a promotion price of, hey, this is a launch promotion. We want to get people reading this book. And yeah, that's just the idea of it. You want to get more people to read the book. You want to lower the bar to say, the bar to get this book is very low now. Go ahead, buy it, read it, leave us a review. You want to boost in the rankings early on because most of those distribution platforms will give your book a sort of halo effect for the first couple weeks. So the more readers, the more reviews that you can get in those first couple weeks, the more likely your book is going to stay long lasting, the more likely your book is going to last in the long term, in the upper rankings of various genres or various topics. So if people search for certain things, your book is more likely to show up for that, as opposed to if you didn't have a very good launch, then you can do a relaunch down the line, which some people do that and can work well for them. But it varies. You ideally want to get a good book launch upfront. So free launch promo pricing, that can be great. Another option is to get some free book advertising sites and work through their platforms. There's a number of them out there. There's a number for niche genres. There's a number for just general books. I've had okay success with that. I don't know how much I would recommend it, but it can work well for some people. I've heard great things from some people working with these sites. Continuing off of the advanced readers copies section, you might want to also look at doing some content creation and some book influencer marketing, stuff like that. For content creation, maybe put together a book launch video, something that really drums up hype for your book of, hey, this new cool book that solves this problem or that promises this transformation is out, and you have a cool minute to minute and a half video featuring this book. It's like, okay, it's a little something. Like you want to have stuff that people can interact with, stuff that people can share, stuff that people can say, this feels professional. Something that says this book wasn't written by an amateur. People want to read things that feel like they're written by experts. Finally, just a little extra touch up on the end is creating Amazon A+ content. This is essentially like extra bonus pictures or bonus like sales marketing stuff that you can put on your Amazon product page near the bottom, where it just shows and features like your book or your product in various situations, such as a digital copy of your book on a tablet or a physical copy sitting on a shelf somewhere. You can typically do this through Canva pretty effectively. They have a lot of interesting like book mock-ups, so that works pretty well for me. Moving on to step 13, getting reviews. We're almost done. There are two main ways I've been successful in getting reviews. One of them is the in-book ask. I mentioned this earlier with, I want to say it was step 6 in editing, by having an asking for reviews tactfully section of the book. It can work well for some people. For some people, it doesn't really work much at all, but you never know. Just a good way to do it. Next, for me, this is where I got a lot of my reviews, and it's what worked well for me in the long run, and it's what helped me sell a lot of books. There is a platform called Pubby where authors can get together, and this is a good way for you to get your book out there. It's not doing book swaps, where it's not saying you give me a good review and I'll give you a good review. Essentially what it is that a bunch of authors will put their book for free on a platform, and they'll say, my book is up here, and you can pay a certain number of points to put your book on this platform. Then, in order to get more points, you have to go and review other people's books. You can do it anonymously, you can do it like with your name, but all you have to do is read the book, and then you give an honest, authentic review of that book on the Amazon page. So you don't feel the pressure of saying this book is a 5-star out of 5-star book, even if it really wasn't. It's a way for you to get good, authentic reviews for your book from other authors who are looking for reviews for books. So I found it to be very good and very effective for me. It's where I got probably a good 50 to 60 reviews for my book. And that really helped me early on boost my book up in the rankings so I could get more reviews down the line. Finally, this may be one of the most effective ways for you to market and really prepare to get your first book out there. And that is to work on your next book. There is nothing like working on your next book that advertises your first book. There's something about having a backlog, a back category of a backlog of books where people say, wow, I stumbled across maybe their books 2 or 3, and then I realize, hey, I want to read more from this author, and they have a backlog that I can go back and read through. It's amazing how creating more and more books will ultimately market and advertise all of your other books. It's probably one of the best ways to do it, because publishing and writing, it really is a numbers game. If you write one book out there, if you write one book and you put it out there, what are the chances you're going to be quote unquote successful off of that one book? Very slim. If you write 10 books out there, if you write 10 books and you put them out there, how successful are you likely to be from writing books then? More likely to be successful because you have 10 times as many books out on the market. What if you happen to write 50 books? You have 50x the potential compared to writing one book, and 5 times more potential than writing 10 books. Working on and writing your next book is probably the best way to continue being an author, continue being a publisher. It's just a numbers game. That's all there is to it. So, in summary, what are my 14 steps to writing and publishing your first nonfiction book? 1. Choose your topic. 2. Do your research. 3. Make your outline. 4. Write your first draft. 5. Create your lead magnet. 6. Edit and improve your draft. 7. Format your content. 8. Generate your metadata. 9. Choose your distribution channels. 10. Create your covers. 11. Get your ARC copies. 12. Make and execute your launch plan. 13. Get reviews. And 14. Continue on to the next book. What do you think? What am I missing? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this episode, then please share with a friend you think would like it, or share it on social media. It would absolutely mean the world to me, and it helps the podcast grow so much. With all that said, thanks for listening. I greatly appreciate it, and I'll talk to y'all later.